Welcome to our Committee of Adjustments, December the 10th, 2024. Please note that this meeting is being broadcast and recorded. Recordings will be made available on the town's YouTube channel. At this time, I would ask that anyone have their cell phones on to please put them on mute. And I will introduce the staff and committee members that are here today. I'll start with our planner, Randy Shea, senior planner, Maria Cosa Rossi, chief administrative officer, Adam Sabansky, our planning technician, Mackenzie Baird, and our development services manager of County of Lambton, Corinne Nada. I will introduce our committee members, starting with my far right, our committee member, Jennifer Turk. To my left, Deputy Mayor Nettie McEwen, and to my far left, oh my God, committee member Les Goldhawk. We'll start with our first application. Oh, sorry, I have a motion here from Nettie McEwen, seconded by Les Goldhawk. That the minutes of the regular Committee of Adjustments meeting held November the 12th, 2024 be approved as presented. All those in favor? That is carried. I would also like to state that any members that have pecuniary interests, please report them at the appropriate. I'll start with our first minor variance application. 2524. PIC notice that an application is made by Bill Langford with respect to the property known as Concession 4, Part Lot 3, Town of Plympton-Wyoming, 3273, London Line. Subject property is zoned agricultural. 1A1. The following variances from zoning bylaw 97 of 2003 have been requested for the proposed add-on to an existing accessory building. Number one, a variance of approximately 108 square meters, 1,162.5 square feet to permit the maximum ground floor level to be 298 square meters, 3,007. Pardon?
That's the
wrong one.
previous one.
Sorry. Okay. Scratch that, YouTube. Oh, Michigan line. Sorry. No.
It's the right, but they.
Last month.
Oh, so the one I have, sorry, Mackenzie. One you printed me, I'll read it off my thingy. I don't have, I'll read it from the November notice. Sorry.
So there wouldn't be an updated notice for.
No, I'm gonna go back to the November notice.
Okay.
I thought we had printed that one off, but that's okay.
You want my iPad? Oh, okay.
You have it on there, the notice on there, Nettie?
I have the recommendation that you might want to read.
Second. Oh, thank you. Oh, that'll be far better. Thank you. Isn't that the one I just read?
It has the updated numbers.
Okay. Okay. Great. I'll start again. So once again, an application from Bill Langford. The subject property is zoned agricultural 1A1. The following variances have been requested for the proposed accessory building addition garage. A variance of approximately 48.9 square meters, 528 square feet to permit the maximum ground floor area of 238.9 square meters, 2,571.4 square feet, notwithstanding the maximum ground floor area of 190 meters, 2,045.14 square feet as per section 3.3.5 A3. And number two, relief from section 3.3.3A to allow the garage to be constructed in the front yard of the property. I will call upon our planner, Randy Shea, for her report.
Thank you, your chair. Yeah, so the owners of 3273 London Line, the application was heard at the previous Committee of Adjustment meeting. At that meeting, it was determined that the application be deferred until the applicant could come forward with planning staff and come up with a new configuration of the proposed addition to their accessory structure. With that, they did make kind of a significant decrease. So now the variance is only requiring 48.9 square meters, whereas the previous proposal had an area of approximately 298 square meters and needed that 108 square meter variance. When going through the new updated proposal, staff, myself did complete a site visit in which it was staked out, and there was no concerns that were noted through that site visit. And overall, it has been deemed that with the updated request, it can be considered appropriate for the location of the lot as well as for the lot itself. So if there's any other questions, I'm happy to answer those.
All right. Mr. Langford, anything you'd like to say?
I think we covered it. We shrunk it significantly from 56% to 25% over the allowed limit there. So shuffled quite a few vehicles off the property for good to accommodate this size. So I think that's pretty much it there. Obviously, you can see by the rendering, in other words, concerns last month about it being an eyesore, but I don't think that's an eyesore, but yeah, other than that, I think that's good. If anybody else has any questions.
Yeah, I'll go through the committee and they'll ask, Lindsay, any correspondence referring to this application?
Through your chair, we received no correspondence related to the application.
Okay, thank you. I'll start with our committee. I'll start with my far left. Committee member Les, any questions?
No, I having a look at this, and actually that depiction that's up there now shows it very nicely. So, and I think it was Mike last month stated that it's actually a good barrier for themselves against the parking lot that's behind them from Sipkin. So I don't have any issue with it.
Okay. Nettie?
Questions?
Yes.
Actually, I don't have any questions. You've done what we asked you to do, and it's good. It's just good now. Yeah, as far as I'm concerned, it's meets the requirements of the minor variance. So
Jennifer?
oh, I don't have any.
My only comment is thanks for going back and making some adjustments. It sounds like our committee appreciate that as well. So I will have a motion here by Les Goldhawk, or by Jennifer Turk, seconded by Les Goldhawk, that the report by Randy Shea, planner, dated December the 2nd, 2024, received, and minor variance application A-2524 requesting the following variances from the town of Plympton-Wyoming zoning bylaw to accommodate an addition to the existing accessory structure. One, a variance of approximately 48.9 square meters, 528 square feet to permit the maximum ground floor area of 238.9 square meters, 2,571.4 square feet, notwithstanding the maximum ground floor area of 190 square meters, 2,045.14 square feet as per section 3.3.5A3. And number 2, relief from this from section 3.3.3A to allow the garage to be constructed in the front yard of the property. Be approved with the following conditions. Certified lot grading plan be submitted to the town of Plympton-Wyoming and approved by the town prior to permit issuance. Number 2, a final grading plan certificate submitted to the town of Plympton-Wyoming upon final completion and subject to town final approval. Number 3, building permit required, applicant to apply for a building permit and comply with all requirements as prescribed by the Ontario Building Code and to the satisfaction of the County of Lambton Building Services Department. Number 4, to ensure eaves troughs, downspouts, and grading is always maintained accordingly and within owned property boundaries, no exceptions. Number 5, to ensure the property is generally maintained and drained during the construction process and that drainage waters are not diverted to neighboring properties and that weeds and grass are always maintained within 20 centimeters, 8 inches or less. Number 6, that septic system be partially uncovered to confirm the component location, size, and condition. That a revised detailed drawing be submitted. This must be completed to the satisfaction of the County Building Services Department. Number 7, that a site inspection be conducted to confirm location and components of the septic system to ensure that sewage effluent is neither being emitted or discharged onto the surface nor in the close proximity to the new proposed accessory building addition. Number 8, in the event of the septic system is not in general conformance with the Ontario Building Code, a new Part 8 system will be required to be installed. Number 9, if plumbing is being proposed in the accessory building, then a full septic assessment will be required. And number 10, for the detached accessory structure, no personal storage and use only, no habitable space, no livestock permitted, and no commercial or industrial uses permitted. I'll call the question. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I was gonna ask a question. I thought you
Yeah.
were gonna ask for the vote.
Yeah, I have, but go ahead.
For, if there's no septic, system going to be used in that building or that addition, why do they have to go through this septic system inspection?
If I can?
Yeah.
The septic system inspection is to make sure that there is an adequate septic system on the lot. If there wasn't, if it was an under drain, a direct line to the ditch, there's significant space being taken up through this new building. We need to make sure that a proper septic system is in place. It's been on planning applications, on every single planning application review that septic is assessed.
Okay.
We don't foresee a problem, but we do need to confirm because there are no records.
That's good, yeah.
And I believe you did get a hold of Simon?
Yeah, I had a good talk with Simon. It's pretty easy to see.
Yeah.
It's a big green area, weeping bed, and I know where the tank is, so he'll make a site visit when the time comes and so I can show him where everything is. It's on the opposite side of the property where the house is being built, or the garage.
So normally we try to clear these conditions if we can before the applications come forward, but at this time we weren't sure if it was going to be passed by committee. So there's no sense for the proponents to undertake all those inspections and satisfy those conditions unless they actually are successful in their ask.
Thank you very much. Call the question. All those in favor? That's carried. There's a 20-day appeal period. Obviously, you can talk to Mackenzie and Planner Randy if you have any questions throughout, and obviously Corinne as well. So, thank you.
Okay.
All right, we'll resume our meeting. We have an application by Jack and Liz
Oops, here.
Coutier.
No.
Okay, my apologies. I'm gonna read both the consent application and the minor variance application. We'll vote on them separately. I'll read both notices. Because we're gonna be talking about the same application. So I will be reading for a little bit here. Minor variance application, consent application B 2024. Take notice, an application has been made by Jack, Liz Coutier, Nair as agent with respect to property known as Concession 7S Lot 22, Town of Plympton, Wyoming, 6242 Blue Heron Drive. The applicant is requesting permission to sever the lot municipally known as 6242 Blue Heron Drive into two portions. The proposed first portion is approximately 7.53 hectares, 18.60 acres, and to be added to the balance of the lands municipally known as 5249 Egremont Road, which is approximately 32.43 hectares, 80.14 acres. Create a lot of approximately 39.96 hectares, 98.74 acres. The proposed second portion is approximately 12.71 hectares, 31.40 acres, and is to be added to the balance of the lands known as 5202-5218 Michigan line, which is approximately 20.23 hectares, 50 acres, to create a lot of approximately 32.94 hectares, 81.40 acres. The subject lands are zoned agricultural 1A1 and woodlot WD as per the Town of Plympton, Wyoming zoning bylaw 97 of 2003. The resulting farm parcel at 5202 and 5218 Michigan line would not meet the required minimums as per table A of the zoning bylaw. Thus, approval of this consent results in a necessary minor variance A 2624 to be heard concurrently with this proposal. And I will read minor variance application for A 2624. Take notice that an application has been made by Jack and Liz. Concession 7S part lot 22, Town of Plympton, Wyoming, 5202 to 5218 Michigan line. The subject property is zoned agricultural 1A1. Consent application B 2024, which is also being heard concurrently with this proposal, is requesting permission to sever a 12.71 hectare, 31.40 acres from lands municipally known as 6242 Blue Heron Drive to be added to the balance of the lands known municipally as 5202 to 5218 Michigan line, which is currently approximately 20.23 hectares, 50 acres. The following variants from zoning bylaw 97 of 2003 have been requested. Number one, a variance of 5.06 hectares, 12.50 acres to permit the appropriate area of the resulting farm parcel to be 32.94 hectares, 81.40 acres, notwithstanding the minimum required area of 38 hectares, 93.90 acres as per table A. I will now refer to our senior planner, Maria, for report.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So we have up on the screen a mapping that will clearly depict the proposals that are being put forth with these applications. So in terms of parcel D, that's already close to a 80-acre lot. And then the middle lot there that's in the pink, that is the portion of lands that is being subdivided. And it's divided by the McHale drain. So a portion of that, which would be about 18.6 acres, will be added to parcel D, and then the balance of the lands south of the McHale drain are going to be added to parcel A, which is further south. Both the consent and the minor variance applications comply with all the legislation and the official plan policies and zoning generally. So planning does not have any concerns and is recommending approval of both. There is just in the conditions for the consent, there is a typo. It should read that in terms of the size, instead of the 202.23 hectares, it should read as 20.23, and that's just a typo for the decimal place.
Thank you very much. Anything to add? It's yours. Or I believe that also Schneier as agent, anything to add to Maria's? Oh, he's not online? He is online.
Oh,
So Mr. Schneier or the applicant?
Yes, I am here.
Anything to add to our planner's report?
No, I don't, Mr. Chair.
I'll refer to our committee then. Sorry, I'll ask Mackenzie, any correspondence related to this application?
No correspondence received in related to the application.
Great, thank you. I'll start on my right. Jennifer?
I don't have anything.
Okay, I'll go to my left. Deputy Mayor McEwen.
so if, like, there was a severance off that parcel D many years ago, that doesn't count, that's okay?
Through you, Mr. Chair. Yes, based on the changes with the 2024 PPS, staff have determined that rather than look at the changes and applying them retroactively, that we would just apply them moving forward. So at this point in time, to be fair to all applicants coming in with eventual applications for surplus farm dwelling severances, we are just looking at the policy and legislative requirements moving forward. Now, I would like to mention that these applications are to accommodate a future surplus farm dwelling severance. Currently, the applicants, the owners are residing on parcel D as their primary residence, but I believe and they can address this specifically, that will change down the road prior to any subsequent applications coming forward to council and committee. But that has been brought to our attention, so I would just like to address that now.
Sort of figured that out anyway. Okay, thanks.
Any other questions? Lots.
No, actually that, excuse me, that drawing fix it pretty well. Other than hearing all the
numbers?
all of this, it actually nails it pretty good. And I mean, the drain that runs through there is a natural division for that. And I believe it puts one of them into the proper acreage for a farm too, right?
Through you, Mr. Chair, the one parcel will be undersized. The issue with the drain was initially a concern for staff, but the Conservation Authority has deemed that they have no concerns with that. And also from an environmental perspective, because the property is currently owned by, the properties are currently owned by the same owner, it would eliminate having to construct additional structures for the creek crossing, is my understanding as well. So the farming operations themselves will be negatively affected by these changes.
I don't have anything else. I think it's
Great. I see we have some folks out in the audience. Any questions from anyone else attending? No, we don't have anyone scheduled to speak, but if you have any questions.
I was curious about the NUTMA, that severance that had gone to 5171. Because we can remember in the past where we were talking about how that was already a farm severance off that property, but obviously you're saying you're not retroactively applying 124 rules.
Through you, Mr. Chair. So the 2024 rules currently allows for one surplus farm dwelling severance per farm consolidation. So the 2024 provincial planning statement has provided that clarity. But in order to be fair to applicants moving forward, it was viewed by staff that we would use that requirement or that legislative requirement moving forward as opposed to applying it retroactively.
Any further questions? Nothing? Okay. I have a motion by Jennifer Turk, seconded by Les Goldhawk, that the report by Maria Casa Rossi dated December the 2nd, 2024 be received and the consent application B-2024 requesting permission to sever the lot municipally known as 6242 Blue Huron Road along the McGill Drain and conveyed to the adjacent farm parcels known as municipally as 5249 Egremont Road and 5202 to 5218 Michigan Line be approved, subject to the following conditions. Owners apply and receive approval from a minor variance for the property municipally known as 5202 to 5218 Michigan Line. Variance is intended to recognize that despite being increased in a size from 20.23 hectares, 50 acres to 32.94 hectares, 81.40. Farm parcel does not meet the full lot size requirement set out in the zoning. Number two, the severed lands be deeded same name and interest as the lands which they are being added, and that section 53 of the Planning Act applies to any future conveyances or transactions. Number three, all Drainage Act assessments applicable to the lands be reapportioned accordingly. The agreement provided by the town and signed by the respective property owners of each of the affected lands. The parties cannot mutually agree to the apportionment, or if the town does not approve, the town shall instruct an engineer in writing to apportion the assessment among the parts into which the land was divided, and the applicant shall pay the engineering fees for such apportionment. The fees will be paid prior to the stamping of the deeds. Number four, a copy of the final RD plan or survey be submitted to the town of Plympton-Wyoming. Number five, a copy of the deed and survey must be submitted to the Secretary Treasurer in form suitable for registration. Number six, additional severance fees be required as required by the town have been paid for all documents will be endorsed. And the conditions must be met and the survey and deed be presented within 2 years from the date of the decision or the consent will lapse. I'll call the question. All those in favor? That is carried. Then I will move once again a motion by Les Goldhawk, seconded by Jennifer Turk, that minor variance application A-2624 to permit the resulting undersized farm parcel area of 32.94 hectares, 81.40 acres for the property municipally known as 5202 to 5218 Michigan Line, notwithstanding the required minimum area of 38 hectares, 93.90 acres be approved, subject to the following conditions. Number one, approval of consent application B-2024 and completion of all associated conditions of said consent satisfaction of the municipality. Call the question. All those in favor? That motion is carried. As you've heard before, there's a 20-day appeal period. And you can speak with Mackenzie or Maria if there's any questions about the application within the next 20 days. Right, thank you.
Wait for the next time.
All right, we have some business arising. Our business arising once again is our business that we can talk about as the far as anything to be added to the comprehensive zoning bylaw amendment? Anything to be added to that?
Through your chair, currently the bylaw amendment, the update, we're working on providing comments to, with the bylaw amendment update, we've taken all previous kind of concerns throughout. But we looked at in the zoning bylaw update and providing them over, so, kind of where we're at in the process, if there's anything else that we'd like to address, then we're happy to bring those up as well, as we continue the process.
Great, thank you. Any questions from our plan? Or our planner? I don't think we have any other business arising, Mackenzie, other than new business. Correct?
Not at this time.
Okay, so our new business, once again, we have a staff report by Maria, our senior planner. Go ahead. Our additional residential units.
Thank you. So we just have a brief presentation this evening to go over additional residential units. We can go to the next slide. So there have been some changes through Bill 23 initially, which was back in 2022. And these changes override municipal official plans and also zoning bylaws. And this is to permit, as of right, up to 3 residential units in total on residential lots in the settlement area that are connected to full municipal water and sewage services. This configuration can look like having the main dwelling and the 2 additional residential units all in the main dwelling, or you can have the main dwelling, 1 additional residential unit in the same dwelling, and then the 3rd would be a unit in an accessory building. And the following slides, I think, will also show the various configurations. They'll be coming up. So the legislation allows for up to a maximum of 1 parking space per additional residential unit. There is no minimum floor area permitted to be identified in the zoning for these units. And they are exempted from development charges and also parkland dedication or cash in lieu contributions, provided that the primary dwelling does not contain more than 2 additional residential units. And the reason there is that stipulation is that there are some municipalities that are allowing for up to 4 residential units per property. So 1 would be the main dwelling and 3 would be the additional residential units. So London is actually one of them. Toronto is another. Actually, Toronto is actually, if they haven't passed it already, they're going to be allowing up to 5. And I believe Milton is another one. So this diagram here is just showing a schematic of the various options. Like, for example, the first one would be a single detached, and it's showing that there's a basement apartment unit there with a converted garage at the back. Now, it does, there has been some discussion about apartment, like an additional residential unit would be permitted in a basement apartment, but nothing really stipulated for a cellar. Currently, our zoning regulations and most of our municipal zoning regulations do not allow for units in the cellar unless.
Explain the difference between a basement and a cellar, because I refer to them both the same. A cellar is a basement, isn't it, or vice versa?
Usually a cellar is further underground and it's closer to some of the services that I can look up the definition in the meantime, but usually it's further underground. And there's stipulations in the zoning that it has to be so far away from this. It can't be lower than a certain amount, and it has to have it can't be so much further than below grade. So a cellar would be even lower than that. But I can look up the definition so that we have.
For that basement additional, is there any regulations or rules as far as egress out of that area?
Yes, so through your chair, with the additional residential units, they are still required to comply with public health and safety, building code, fire code, all those things are still required as a minimum. There's nothing in the legislation that would curtail compliance with those regulations and those codes. So the next slide just shows some additional images of possibilities for where the additional residential units can be located. Some are located on upper floors, on the lower floors, again in the detached. So these were just some additional images to provide a visual representation of what they could potentially look like. So the as of right provision is basically put in place just to ensure that there's nothing in the official plan or in the zoning that prohibits the ability of property owners from adding these additional residential units. In terms of the zoning or flexibility that municipalities might have, it is in terms of the height and the lot coverage at this point in time. We will be discussing lot coverage a little bit more detail further on in the presentation. But it's just to ensure that they are not prohibited. And if they are currently prohibited and the official plans and the zoning aren't amended, then the current legislation would override that. Now, currently, the official plan for Plympton-Wyoming does address in general terms, because there is the second dwelling, the additional second dwelling unit that's permitted in the dwelling, but the official plan policy is very general, and it indicated already at that time when it was being drafted that it would comply with any additional legislation related to additional residential units. So in terms of residential units in agricultural areas, this is discretionary for municipalities and not mandated. It's not a requirement with the legislation. The legislation only mandates the additional residential units for residential lots in the urban settlement area, and they must be connected to full municipal water and sewer services. So in terms of the agricultural areas, the provincial planning statement does indicate that they are allowed, if municipalities agree to that, they are permitted to have 2 additional residential units. In fact, on the agricultural parcels, they could technically have up to 4 because the worker housing is permitted as of right in the agricultural zone. So that is on top of what would be permitted with the additional residential units. Now, there's obviously some criteria that needs to be met for the agricultural parcels, and that would be that the units would be limited in size, they would be in close proximity to the dwelling or the farm cluster. And then, of course, the connections to septic and sanitary sewers would be, that would have to be adhered to as well. So if there is a need to upgrade the septic, whether it be the current septic system or if a separate septic system would have to be installed for the additional residential unit, then that would be, some of the criteria that would be looked at and conditions. It has to also ensure, because it has to also ensure that it doesn't hinder the current agricultural operation, because the policies for the agriculture area still is to maintain and protect the agricultural long-term use.
Right, but where do you, is it stipulated in the exact words that a seasonal seasonal workers dwelling, it's still a residential unit? Like, I don't understand why it's just because it's an agricultural use, why it isn't just described as a residential use. So I don't see how it can be included in the ARUs.
Oh, through
Not used.
through your chair, it is not. So on the agricultural parcel, if the municipality so chooses, the agricultural parcel could have actually up to 4. One is the main dwelling, second is the worker housing, and then the 2 additional residential units. So when I'm indicating with the additional residential units is the worker housing is not included in those 2.
I know, but why isn't it? It's still a residential unit.
It's permitted it's permitted, the worker housing is permitted.
No, but okay, so is this in your interpretation or is it actually spelled right out?
No, the provincial planning statement indicates that the worker housing is outside of the additional residential unit.
Okay.
So they can technically have up to 4
Yep.
Units on the.
As long as it's, you know, not just an interpretation, that's.
No, it's clearly spelled out in the
Right.
statement.
Is there a limit in regards to because you're talking about an agricultural farm, and basically like the main house is on the farm, but typically like there is a plot of land that is set up as the residential area of the farm. How big can that get?
So through your chair, right now, it has to be limited in scale in terms of regulations stipulating that size. There can be no minimum that with the I apologize, I'm going to go back. So in terms of the ARUs for the agricultural area, again, this is all discretionary. So there would be a possibility to be a little bit more particular in the regulations for the additional residential units, although I would anticipate that we would make them consistent across the board. But it has to be limited in scale. It's not clearly defined right now because we don't have anything in place to define what that looks like.
So just to follow up on that, but does that mean you have the residential unit here? Just that one that we just seen, if that was from Michigan to Egremont, if that was all one unit farm, and they wanted to build additional residential units on Michigan line rather than the
Vermont.
Egremont, where the dwelling is currently. Is that allowed? Or does it have to be in the cluster?
They would have to be near the main residence, so they'd have to be near the Egremont Road, right?
Yes, it has to be close
For
to that
septic.
cluster.
Plus for septic services, would have to have them close together.
I just didn't hear that. Like I heard, you know, you can have that many on a property. But,
It says though, see the number, the second, after ARUs must be, the second point.
close to the primary
Situate,
dwelling,
yes.
farm cluster.
Yeah. Well.
Okay.
and-
That's gonna be pushed.
So through you, Mr. Chair, could you just clarify a little bit? I just want to make sure I fully understand your question. Is your concern that it could be anywhere on the property?
Well, that's to the extreme.
No, so just to clarify that, it needs to be close to the primary dwelling or the farm cluster. It can't hinder the farm operation, so it can't just automatically go somewhere where it would impact their ability to continue farming or they're taking farmland out of the property to accommodate for it. It has to still maintain the primary goals and principles of, you know, the protection of the agricultural property and operation and its long-term viability. So it can't be something that can be sporadically put anywhere. So we would need to look at that. If that's what council so chooses to move forward with, we would need to look at the regulations to ensure that those things.
But that second point is. You're,
maintained. Yes, absolutely.
okay.
But I'd say or farm cluster, so it could possibly be, you know, more houses go on Michigan in that reference to Coutier's.
We would have to, that's pulled right out of the statement,
Okay.
but we haven't gotten that far into the assessment, but it certainly would not allow for a sprawl if that's what the concern is.
So they have to have their own private sewer system. They can't hook into the one that's already there, correct?
It would depend, and a septic assessment would need to be done to determine if the current system could accommodate for
Oh, I
that.
see.
And then if not, then
Alright.
it would be a separate process. So the additional residential units on the farm parcels cannot be severed. That is the interpretation that staff have taken from the material that's been provided.
Until they change it next year. Sorry.
So Bill 185, which was enacted in June of this year, it introduced some further changes to the Planning Act. The big one really in relation to this is that there is, it's authorized the minister to have broader regulation making powers. So the minister has did release in September and placed on the Environmental Registry of Ontario as a minister's regulation specifically related to additional residential units, and was proposing some exemptions. Now we have in that they opened that up on the registry for a comment period for about a month until October 23rd. So the following slide will present some information, but I'm going to provide an update because it is a little outdated now. We have since November 25th, when this initially went to council, received a minister's letter indicating that the minister's regulation has passed. So staff have confirmed that the minister's regulation has now come into effect as of November 20th. So the minister's letter went out November 28th advising municipalities, but they filed and posted the regulation on November 20th. If we can move to the next slide. So what's being proposed here is again, that the additional residential units are mandated on residential lands in the urban settlement area, and they need to be connected to municipal services. The public health and safety requirements, including those in the building code, the fire code, and any other relevant legislation, including the Conservation Authorities Act, those continue to apply. So they have indicated some proposed changes for angular plane, the maximum lot coverage, floor space index, minimum lot size and lot area, and building distance separation. In terms of the angular plane, this doesn't really apply to Plympton-Wyoming. This is looking at the scale of buildings and their height in relation to lower density areas and the shadows that they cast. So they have to completely remove those requirements. So municipalities that have those requirements and those regulations, now they are not permitted to apply any of them. In terms of maximum lot coverage, this will have implications for the municipality. This will have implications province-wide, actually. The minister is regulating that the lot coverage that permits additional residential units can be 45% as a minimum. So so this will have an impact for us because currently the lot coverage for residential properties is anywhere between 30 and 35%. So again, some things to consider with this is obviously servicing capacity and ability for the owners to connect to municipal services has an impact here as well. But this is the minimum that has been established by the minister. Now, there are those municipalities that have established higher than 45. I believe that some have gone up as potentially 50 and 55. So they are permitted to, there is a caveat in the legislation that would allow them to go that far.
All right, but while you're on the lot coverage, that means any constructor that comes in or person that's wanting to build just a single house on lot, you can build up to 45%.
Through you, Mr. Chair, that only on lots where additional residential units are permitted. That is actually a very good question. I would have to clarify that. That's an excellent question. I don't believe that the idea is to have a single family dwelling that occupies 45% of the lot if there were no additional residential units proposed at the time that they are constructing. However, I will ask that question specifically. That would be my understanding, and logically, believe that that would make sense. However, I will ask that question. The legislation is clear. It is for residential lots that contain additional residential units. So if someone is coming in just with a single family detached without specifying that they have additional residential units, I need to verify that.
This is kind of going beyond that is taxes. In regards, and this is maybe additional dwelling lots. Are they going to be taxed appropriately?
It would be impact who would assess that, and if impact typically finds that accessory dwelling units or additional units do increase value, they would increase taxes accordingly. But we don't set that value because it's still residential, so it'd be paid the residential rate. It would have to be result in increased value, which intact. And would determine.
What if it decreases the value?
That would again be for impact to decide it.
If I may add to that, the literature seems to indicate that they would be taxed appropriately to take into account the additional residential units. Although they are waived from development charges and the other items that were listed there as parkland dedication.
And
This
also,
is all fairly new, so.
also extra stress on the sewage. Or sewage. So they should be taxed appropriately.
So in terms of lot size requirements, there's no minimum lot size or area that is required specifically for additional residential units. Minimum lot size area zoning bylaws apply equally to residential dwellings with or without additional residential units. That's an important feature as well. So there's been some additional changes with the new minister's regulation. They've introduced some additional definitions and they've removed some. They've enhanced just to provide clarity in terms of the definitions and the placement of these additional residential units. So municipal zoning bylaws will need to align with this minister's regulation. And in cases of inconsistency, then the minister's regulation will supersede anything that is done locally.
Sorry to be a pain.
I got all my questions written down here. So go ahead, Les.
The other one that it's like, if it's within the same unit, is it going to be similar to apartments where there's firewalls, that type of thing that are requested in the permitting of these? Or I seen building distance separation. Is it going to keep the same kind of separation as housing is right now, and more for the fire?
Through you, Mr. Chair, the building code and fire code requirements still need to be maintained. Those are not overridden by the minister or any other legislation that's come forth for additional residential units. In terms of the building separation, what's being required is that it does not, at this point in time, does not affect Plympton-Wyoming, because in terms of building separation from like the main dwelling and a detached structure, we have well, actually, I'm just going to talk about the building separation for now. The minimum required is a 4-meter separation between the building and the structure that contains an ARU. And currently in Plympton-Wyoming, it is 1.2 meters. However, the legislation clearly stipulates that if there is a zoning bylaw that permits a separation of less than 4 meters, that is acceptable. So the requirement for the minimum 4 meters is overridden by the zoning bylaw, the municipal zoning bylaw, if it's less. Initially, when this was initially proposed and posted, they were requiring something slightly different, but this is in line. This would not affect Plympton-Wyoming unless they wanted to make changes. But at this point in time, until we sit down with fire and building, I don't anticipate a change to the 1.2, but it could potentially change based on discussions with them.
That 1.2 to the edge of the property or to,
There is a 1.2 meter distance between the ground and the air that between currently for accessory structures and buildings in the zoning. It's currently 1.2. So that would remain unless there is a need to change that due to fire code and building code. But they've set this minimum.
okay.
That's the end of my presentation, and certainly.
I've got a couple questions, actually. So in your presentation, I guess my question, the number one question from the start, had a maximum of one parking spot. So does that mean that doesn't need to be a designated parking spot for the additional ARU? So I think in your first slide said a maximum one parking space.
Okay, so that one parking space for the additional residential unit, so we would still need to maintain the regular parking standard for the main residential dwelling.
Right?
So the parking space, so if you, let's say, had two additional residential units, you'd have to be able to accommodate for 2 additional parking spots or up to. So there are some municipalities that are choosing not to require parking at all, but this offers flexibility for municipalities to ensure that they have at least one parking space per additional residential unit, especially because of the congestion on the municipal roads. So, and they can be in tandem, so it could be a parking spot that requires individuals to move their cars in order to access.
So it could be already the existing laneway, right? Or whatever, the existing driveway.
It could be the driveway, correct, yes.
But they're not saying there's a minimum.
There is no minimum, they're setting a maximum. So the minimum is technically 0, but you can't have more than 1.
My next question is, one of often our conditions for sheds or accessory buildings, one of our conditions is no habitable space. With tonight, we had same thing, one of the conditions, no habitable space. Should we be taking that off of our conditions, I guess, or how, and I guess which leads to my next question, how would someone apply to have an ARU? And would they be able to say if they have a shed or whatever that is big enough or whatever that meets the requirements and is already hooked to septic, can they turn that into an ARU by renovating or doing whatever? So I guess it's kind of 2 questions. One, should we designate that, not to be a habitable space, because according to this, it can be a habitable space if it's designated as an ARU. And 2, how would somebody apply, or if they wanted to renovate something, would that go through committee of adjustments, or would it go through council for permission?
The example. So in terms of the example for this evening, that one was zoned agricultural 1. So the legislation for the additional residential units is mandated and required only for those residential properties that are in the urban zoning area and connected to full municipal services. So anything that's on partial services, the legislation does not mandate. It is a discretionary. It's discretionary for municipalities to implement or to approve ARUs on parcels that are not connected to municipal services. So staff will be looking at developing or drafting a zoning bylaw amendment to address additional residential units in compliance with the regulations and in consultation with a number of staff departments and like internal staff departments. Will be looking at examples of what other municipalities have already implemented that are well on their way, just to, as lessons learned and what is doable and what is not. But the next step that staff are looking at is is drafting a zoning bylaw amendment to capture that, because right now we only have the second units in dwellings. So if someone were to apply today, they would be allowed to do it as of right, but we would have to find a way to ensure that what is being proposed complies with what we currently have available, okay? But keeping in mind that there are certain things that we may want to regulate that we cannot, because we need to follow what's in the Planning Act and what's in the Minister's regulation. I'm not sure if I've fully answered your question, but
Yeah,
there is a level of unknown at this point, but we have received a few inquiries, but no one has proceeded with anything at this point, just inquiries.
Don't you think we still continue to put that condition in? Because otherwise, they're just gonna go and put a living quarters in in all these great big sheds, you know, that people have, and they won't be legal. And they won't be according to code.
Yes.
You know, health and safety first.
I think whatever inquiries come in, we would have them come in to speak to us and have a meeting to discuss next steps and ensure that like if they are going to decide to construct an additional residential unit, they still need to apply for a building permit.
But people are going to do that in sheds.
yes.
That's what's gonna happen, and there's nothing wrong with that. But just as long as they comply with, you know, the safety of the people that are gonna live there.
That's why we would ask them to come in to meet with us so that we
But-
could review.
And if,
They are not gonna.
I guess my question goes back to part of the conditions that we've put on already from all the ones before this says no habitable space. Now, if they renovate and make it up to code, are they going against what the conditions are?
But then.
But
they have
because-
to Apply for a bill.
No, I agree, but would that stop them because well. of
The
conditions?
legislation's as of right though, so technically I think it would be allowed, correct?
The as of right is only to ensure that the municipalities do not prohibit them in their policies and in their zoning. It doesn't mean that someone can go and do it without the appropriate steps. So if they require a building permit to make
Yeah.
renovations to allow for that, they still need to comply with those things.
But it would be a built-in process more so than a planning process at that stage, other than confirming lot coverage.
Until there's zoning in place to address. So for example, height still, there's no, you know, implications for height. Municipalities can still set. the
I'm just looking at structures that are already built. You have the framework, you just all needs is to follow the codes of the building codes, right, Corinne? I mean, they would be able to take a shed and make a multi living unit in a shed. I mean, if they already have septic going in, if they already have water and electricity going in.
So it'd be a change of use permit, Bruce.
Yeah.
So they would then have to insulate the floor, they would have to insulate the walls.
Some already have.
Right, like a lot are, they would just need that formal change of use and prove to the building department that it meets minimum provisions. So an accessory residential unit is no different than the house that's being built. It's the same requirements. They have to be energy efficient and they have to meet those minimum requirements. So with that, like you say, the habitable space, because they're changing the use and because they're as of right, just because you guys impose that condition as part of a variance, there's something that it trumps. So they'd be allowed to do it, provided they follow. The reason why we put no habitable space is so people don't automatically do it.
Right. No, I'm aware. Any other questions? Go ahead, Les.
Just one, and maybe this is getting in more of the details. Right now, you may not, but is there a definition of a additional residential unit? Does it have to have its own gas supply, its own hydro supply, what hydrometer? Does it have to have sewage, water?
Definitely has to have
Definitely
sewage
have
and
that.
water under building code.
But defined as far as this represents an additional residential unit.
I don't think it'd have to have as an independent anything, because you could run the gas from the house, the water, the sewer from the house, the hydro from the house. You could It could be just like a bunkie in the backyard with all the services coming as part of the house unit. So there's no.
So it's not really a
individual
separate-
services.
It's not really a separate unit then.
It
It's
is
an extension of the original building.
essentially, that's why it's called an accessory dwelling unit, not a whole other unit. Because it's not fully independent of the property it lies on. It's accessory to it.
So there was previously, prior to this, so when they posted the minister's regulation, proposed regulation on the environmental registry, they had a definition for additional residential unit, but that has now been revoked. So what it was before, the idea was it would be additionally it would be an additional unit that would have its own like sleeping quarters, it would have its own bathroom, those types of things, but now that definition's been revoked, and so they just speak generally about where the additional residential units can be located. So these would be residential units, and I didn't mention this earlier. The additional residential units are for residential properties that contain single detached, semi-detached, and row houses. Specifically, that's what's been mandated. Now, council certainly down the road can mandate that and be more flexible and add additional types of dwellings for that. But it is specifically meant for residential lots that are connected to full municipal services in the urban settlement area. So by implication, we're not going to have additional residential units that are then, that are on properties that are connected to municipal services, connecting to like a separate septic system in the backyard. That's not the intent. That's not going to be permitted. Does that answer your question in terms of that?
Well, I guess my thought process was the way it was written up originally, the way you were talking about in regards to having, said things, whether it be a separate hydrometer, a gas meter, all that sort of thing, because it's an additional residential unit, not an accessory unit per se.
There's nothing in the legislation to require them to have a separate meter and those types of, it's just the connection to the services. They're just mandating it in those urban areas where the residential lands are connected.
Great, thank you. Any other questions? All right. A motion by Nettie McEwen, seconded by Les Goldhawk, that the report by Maria Casa Rossi, senior planner, dated November the 18th, 2024, regarding a zoning bylaw amendment for additional residential units on residential and agricultural lots within the town of Plympton-Wyoming be received. All those in favor? That is carried. All right, any additional new business? Anything for you, Mackenzie?
Nothing for me.
Okay, anything from planning? Anything from the county?
Think it all. Thank you.
I'll ask our committee members, Jennifer. Eddie?
No, sir.
Les, anything from you, Adam? All right, so before I call the motion to adjourn, I would like to thank everyone for their work this year. Had a really busy year here on our Committee of Adjustments. So thank you all very much for your hard work. Next year is 2025. I'm sure it'll be just as busy. So, and we'd also like to wish everyone a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. And Maria does have one thing that I just reminded her of, apparently. So go ahead, Maria.
Just want to mention that, thank you, Mackenzie. He's done quite a bit of work. We prepared a planning update, that will be going next week, to council. And, committee has, heard 49 applications this year in 2024, which is almost half of the total applications, which we've had about 107 come to committee and council and staff. So I just wanted to mention it's been a very, very productive, busy year. This is an increase of almost 48% from applications heard last year. So I did want to mention that, we're doing great work here, and
I agree.
and very productive, so, and we wish you the best for Christmas and New Year as well.
With that, I have a motion by Jennifer Turk, seconded by Les Goldhawk, that the Committee of Adjustments meeting be adjourned and the next meeting be scheduled for January the 14th, 2025 at 5:15 PM. All those in favor? That motion is carried.